Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Iceberg podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat after a short hiatus because it is the summer months and sometimes events pop up and we just can't get in front of a computer screen. But we're back. We're hoping to get back to that consistency that we've been known for throughout the first 5 seasons of Tip of the Iceberg as we get ready for season 6, the 2024-25 season. With that comes a very interesting Pittsburgh Penguins team, as we all know. Today, we're going to discuss the Penguins' biggest challenge going into this season, which is the power play. And how do they get better than they were last year? How do they improve? What is one area that will be key to turning that ship around? Then we're going to talk a little bit about our expectations for Ryan Graves in year 2, and we'll close things out with a little episode of This Week in Penguins History. Let's get started. And let's start things off with the biggest problem the Penguins faced last year, which was their power play. We haven't talked really that much about the power play, Horwat, simply because we knew it was 30th in the league last year. We knew that really up until the coaching change from Todd Reirden to David Quinn, there was not really a personnel change at all that was involved with the Penguins' top power play. But now that's where things have fallen at this point of the summer, where the personnel on the ice is probably going to be the same. The personnel off the ice is David Quinn. We found out that he is officially going to be head manning that unit from a coaching perspective. When you look at them last season, 15.3% success rate, 30th in the National Hockey League. Not only that, they were tied for first in shorthanded goals allowed with 12. Obviously, it was their Achilles heel last year. Is it the most important part of the game to fix going into this season for them to find some more success?
Without doubt it is. And if not because of that poor ranking that it came in, it's the way it just couldn't come up in crucial situations at all throughout the season. From the early games all the way through to the later games, just when you look at how many points the Penguins missed the playoffs by, and then you consider how many games they lost by a goal or 2 goals where their power play went over. There was a running list all seasons out there of every game that the Penguins went 1 for whatever or 0 for whatever on the power play and then lost by a goal or in overtime, even with that extra point. That running list was going on all year, and that if you scratched out 1 or 2 of those they scored 1 power play goal in one of those games, 1 or 2 of them. Then we would have been talking about a playoff team. Like, that's how close the Penguins were to sort of making the playoffs, but also B, just how just how marginally better the power play needed to be to get them further. Mm-hmm. They didn't even have to be mediocre. They didn't even have to be average. They just potted 1 or 2 more, maybe 3 more in certain times, in certain areas, in certain games. They would have been a playoff team. Don't know how far they would have gotten, but they would have been in the playoffs, at least playing extra hockey like everyone's been wanting for the last 2 seasons. So, yeah, absolutely no doubt. Just with that in mind, it needs to be the primary area of focus of work going into this offseason, through training camp, through the preseason, going into the next regular season.
Yeah, and you mentioned it didn't need to be top in the league for them to be a playoff team. It just needed to be a little bit better than it was. I mean, you look at how good the Penguins were after the trade deadline once they got their feet underneath them. I mean, from the trade deadline on, they were 25th in the National Hockey League, and that turned into the best stretch of the year by far, which was mostly April and parts of March. So, again, you just needed to be a little bit better. They were 30th in the league the whole year. If they were 25th in the league the last quarter of the season, and that would have almost got them to a playoff spot, you really just needed to increase that percentage by maybe 3%, and you would have been a playoff team. And again, that's not a good power play. It is still a very bad power play. It's still vastly underwhelming considering the talent that is on the ice for the Penguins every time they get the man advantage. But it would have gotten them into the playoffs last year. Will it get them into the playoffs this year? That remains to be seen. Obviously, plenty of things change in the new year. Teams, rise, teams fall. We'll have to see where everything lands. But one thing is for certain, and you mentioned it, obviously, undoubtedly, the Penguins need to be better on the man advantage. So let's get into the real meat and potatoes of this segment here. What is the key for them to find success on the power play in 2024? I mean, we don't need to get too into the X's and O's. We'll leave that to people like Jesse Marshall, who has studied this power play extensively of The Athletic. But what is one key for them to find more success in 2024?
That's so tough. It really is tough because it did seem like they were shooting the puck quite a bit, at least on the power play. They were letting before they traded him away, they were letting Jake Gensel try to go to work as much as they could. They were letting Sidney Crosby do his work. It might just be to not be patient with it. I think I'm trying to remember some of the big issues that they had. I mean, every time there was a personnel change on it, it was something to note. Every time there was a move up and down from unit 1 to unit 2, it was something to keep an eye on. It's tough to nail down. I also just don't remember exactly what was holding the power play back. I think it was obviously lack of shooting has to go a long way. I think it took them a while to let Erik Karlsson finally just start firing away a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I would say don't be afraid to get creative in one aspect, but in another, work on it. Fire the puck, shoot it a little bit more. Let the superstars do what they can do to, produce offense. I think David Quinn's going to come in and help Erik Karlsson a lot, so that should be a net positive there. Mm-hmm. If you need to move Malkin to the second unit, do that. If you need to move Letang up to the first, like I said, 2 defensemen on the first, Karlsson, Letang, do that. I am sort of running thin on ideas, and I think that's also because we talked about it for 82 games last year.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's one area to me when I look at this power play unit, and it's based on prior history with the players that are out there, because like we mentioned, not only is it going to be the vast majority of players that we saw last year on the power play unit, but 2 of these pieces have been here for 20 years. They've been on the power play unit for 20 years, and it's not like they're passengers on that unit. Things run through Crosby. Things run through Malkin. Maybe the whole power play should be quarterbacked by a defenseman, and it typically is. It was for Letang from 2010 to 2023, and then it was Karlsson last year. But at the end of the day, it's very similar styles that are out there on the ice, and they're missing one key factor, and they've been missing one key factor since 2020. That's a net front presence, and that is production out of the net front presence, not just setting screens, not just taking up space, not just attracting the attention of defenders that need to bear down on you. It's being able to be productive from that role, and that's going to be big for Michael Bunting. You look at the one player that obviously everybody thinks about when they think about the Penguins' net front in the power play, it's Patrick Hornqvist. In his 6 years with the Penguins, the power play was 10th, 16th, 3rd, 1st, 5th, and 16th again. And I understand there's some other players that were here as well, namely Phil Kessel, that helped that on the right half wall. But at the same time, the left half wall. But at the same time, a big part of that was the fact that Patrick Hornqvist was creating havoc in front of the goaltender. Not only that, but he could put the puck in the back of the net. Since Hornqvist left, the Penguins had one good year in the bubble on the power play, 4th, and then since then, 19th, 14th, and 30th. And I think a big reason for that, maybe not the only reason, but a big reason for that is they didn't have a true net front presence. We all remember in 2020, whenever Hornqvist left, we said, all right, who are they replacing him with? It was Jake Gensel. And everybody said, all right, well, he's a little undersized. And don't get me wrong, Gensel was a warrior, and eventually he figured it out to a certain extent, but that's not best utilizing Jake Gensel's skill set. He's a sniper. He's not going to score a lot from the dirty areas in front of the net, at least not at a clip and not as effectively as Patrick Hornqvist was able to. So I think that comes down to Michael Bunting. Bunting, to me, we've heard the comparisons time in and time out of him and Patrick Hornqvist. You look at last year, in just 21 games, Bunting put up 5 power play points, 1 goal, 4 assists. And like I mentioned, that man advantage unit moved from 31st whenever he showed up to 25th from the time he showed up to the end of the season. That's a little bit of an improvement, but in a full season with him, with David Quinn at the helm, you're hoping that net front presence can pay dividends. It's not going to be the end-all be-all. It's not going to be the saving grace of the power play. That is one way to, as you mentioned, just make that marginal difference, which could be the difference between sitting on your couch in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs and actually performing in them.
Yeah, and you're bringing up that net front presence. That is going to be a huge, huge boost. It should be a big boost to the Penguins power play, especially if a guy like Michael Bunting, who has already drawn that Patrick Hornquist comparison on multiple occasions from Mike Sullivan himself, no less. It's a good step in the right direction for that net front presence. And you don't realize just how successful Hornquist was on the power play, because when you think of the power play, you don't necessarily think of those net front presences. You think of the guys who are ripping it from the point or taking those great one-timers. But twice did Hornquist put up over 10 goals on the power play. And he had 10 and 15 in back-to-back seasons. He had 9 the year before that. Like I said, you don't expect those sort of numbers from him. The Penguins had 40 in total last year. 10 was the leader in Crosby. So Patrick Hornquist, in one of his career years here, had 15 power play goals, which dwarfs the 10 that Crosby put up last year. Mm-hmm. So getting a presence, I'm not saying Michael Bunting needs to go out and put up 15, but maybe approach 10, maybe get to 12 at the most. And the assist numbers are the assist numbers. There's, it's hard to track that down in power play stuff, but getting those dirty rebound goals, especially if they're coming in from shots from Karlsson and they're sitting there, that's going to be the huge boost. That's going to be the bump that the Penguins need. Like I said, they were 30th in the league last year. Without looking at the numbers of, power plays and the percentages, if they were 29th, I bet they're a playoff team. One spot up. It's maybe getting to the 29th. Obviously, it includes goals in key games. You got to be specific about it.
Yeah.
But moving up one space maybe helps them get into the playoffs. They had a meaningless game 82 again, but game 81 meant something. They needed to win that. And again, just maybe a couple of goals here and there. Fine, maybe 28th. They're 28th in the league, maybe top 3 in the Metro, because the Metro was kind of a dog pile last year.
Yeah, now here's how we're going to end this segment and this little discussion about the power play, because I'm sure we're going to have plenty of discussions about the power play. Erik Karlsson is likely to start the year as the power play quarterback, the one defenseman at the very least. If there's 2, then of course this conversation changes. But we expect it to be one defenseman. That's what the Penguins have run really the entirety of Crosby and Malkin's career, or the bulk majority, I should say. Would you rather have Karlsson or would you rather have Letang up there for the quarterback of the power play?
I think right now Karlsson. Yeah, I think right now Karlsson. You'll roll with Letang as the second, mostly because Letang's getting older. He needs to start taking that time, taking those step backs. This is something we discussed a little bit a couple weeks ago, I think, too. Mm-hmm. Just let Letang take a second unit, which is what he did most of last year, too, I think, or at least definitely a big portion of it, because he's going to be killing penalties again, too. I think that's the other part, is that Letang's going to be out there killing penalties once again, and maybe even driving offense from that aspect of the game too. So there's a little bit to be said about giving Letang a few fewer minutes, and at least a few fewer minutes on the power play, and then supplementing them with penalty kill time, especially if the Penguins take as many dumb penalties as they did again.
Yeah, I don't think there's a question that Karlsson's going to get the first nod, which we all expected last year. We saw what happened. Obviously, the power play didn't work. I expect it to be, again, Karlsson getting the first nod, but I wouldn't be surprised if you mentioned, I think you alluded to it a little earlier, that rope is a little bit shorter, that if Karlsson starts making the mistakes that he did last year that cost them games, then you see Letang get some more reps on that first unit, because you look at the Penguins this year, they need offense from every corner of this lineup to be able to be successful. We're looking at this team as a team that is a bubble team, probably an outside looking in team to start the year. Any advantage that they can get, they need to take. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a shorter leash on Erik Karlsson this year on that first power play unit. But with that said, it's not like it's a shorter leash for Matt Grzelcyk. It's a shorter leash for Chris Letang, who is somebody else that could one day find himself in the Hockey Hall of Fame. So it's going to be, again, the most important area of the game for the Penguins this year is the power play. You need to be able to find success there and not fall off the face of the earth with the rest of your team. That's going to be huge for them. And it's going to be a conversation that we're going to have on countless opportunities, because in countless occasions, because it is, as you mentioned, it was their Achilles heel, and it was basically the reason they didn't make the playoffs last year. I always think of that Mason McTavish goal that they allowed to the Ducks early in the season, where they had a 5-on-3 with 2 minutes left in the game, and McTavish scores shorthanded with 11 seconds left. They don't even get a pity point out of it. So it's massive. Absolutely massive. Let's move over, and speaking of talking about Achilles heels last year, one of the players that struggled the most for the Penguins was Ryan Graves. I've seen in our comment section, I've seen when I do the lives, the comment section over there, the chat, everybody wants to know, how much longer do I have to watch Ryan Graves in a Penguins uniform? My answer to that is there's no end in sight. Sorry to break it to you. There's no end in sight. Last year was abysmal for Graves. He played his way down the lineup after signing an absolutely massive 6-year deal in the offseason with the Penguins. His struggles were evident from game one. Obviously, everybody remembers that third period against the Chicago Blackhawks. He did not have a good period at all, and people were already at his throat. He finished the season on injured reserve, missed the last 10 games of the year, but I expect him to be better this year. Horwat, I don't know what your expectations are for Ryan Graves. Again, the bar is set very low based on what he did last year, but my expectation is at a base level, he's going to be better than last year, and I do think it's going to be a significant margin. I'm not saying he's going to play up to his contract, because I think that is a large step to take, but I do think he's going to be significantly improved based on what we saw last year.
I could see it being, yeah, he's definitely going to improve because there's not much further down to go.
True.
So he's going to have to take steps in the right direction. Maybe the second year in the new system, everyone's going to try and be positive about. He took a year to learn. It's a bit of a long learning curve, but he took a year to learn the system, and immediately he's getting a new coach. But
yeah,
who cares? Whatever. It should still be. Maybe David Quinn comes in and is a defensive whisperer, not just for Karlsson. Maybe he finds some luck with Ryan Graves as well. Maybe there is some positives that can be drawn from a new coach, despite Ryan Graves still sort of learning things. Yeah, I'd say he's going to take steps forward. He's going to take steps in the right direction. He's going to be better. He's going to have to prove himself. When it comes to how much longer he'll be here, that's a question to rehash closer to the trade deadline to see if he's improved. It's a matter of, as of right now, he's here until the end of the deal, or if he improves and works his way out somehow. If teams even still want to take it, because it is a long deal. It's not something that's going to be traded away this year. But it's a conversation that can come up, around every trade deadline, around every offseason, just for sake of covering the bases of what's the status. Like, it's the way I looked at the Brandon Tanev deal. Every new season, it's okay, what's the status? Where are we?
Yeah.
Every year with Ryan Graves, it's going to be, all right, what's the status? Where are we putting him? How's he working? Is he improving? Is he getting better? Is he worth it? Act like Marcus Pettersson wasn't absolutely in the top of the Penguins trade block for years on end.
Yeah.
And then he goes into, I believe it was the 22-23 season, and lights it up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, actually, no one can have him. And now he may not have a choice but to walk to free agency, but that's a different conversation for a different day. But You see the place that he worked himself into. Again, not a great comparison because Ryan Graves is a year older and had
a different type of player.
Yes, but you see the kind of curve that these defensemen can take in top of trade boards, top of trade blocks, whatever you want to say about it, but then turns it on. A little bit down the line, gets more used to things, turns it on, and then becomes a all hands off type of guy. The type of player you're protecting in expansion drafts. So maybe something turns around. I think everyone has not expectations that he will, but hopes that he will.
Yeah, and to me, there's 3 reasons that I expect better from him. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come on here and said that I expect him to make a, not marginal, but a pretty significant jump from where he was last year. And one of them you already mentioned. It's his second year with the team. And I understand everybody wants to compare him to Paul Martin or Sergei Gonchar and what they were able to do. I'm not doing that. I'm comparing him to himself and what he's done in the past when it comes to first full season with a team, second full season with a team. In Colorado, it was drastic. It was, a 6-point boost in Corsi. It was a 6-point boost in expected goals, a 4-point boost in scoring chances, a 6-point boost in high danger chances. And if you look at his second year in New Jersey, they weren't similar, but the floor was much higher for him. Now you look at where the floor is for him, it's lower. I expect it to be a pretty big boost. And another reason for that is he has less responsibility. We all expect, at least he's projected, to start the season on the third pairing. And that's going to give him better matchups. That's going to give him a better fit as a partner in Jack St. Ivan, who's also projected to start the season on the third pairing. which is going to allow Graves to move the puck more and to do the third thing. And the third reason that I'm confident that he's going to be better this year, and that's his confidence. I mentioned it at the outset of this segment. It was from the very first game, not even 60 minutes in to his Penguins tenure, that he had a abysmal period that everybody was blaming him for the loss in a blown lead loss to the Chicago Blackhawks. That is a blow to your confidence. And when it starts from there and it only gets worse, how are you going to turn it around? It makes it difficult. Yes, some professional athletes can zero in, turn things around, but a lot of them can't. Ryan Graves couldn't in year one. He gets that reset. He gets the opportunity to start with less responsibility and build that confidence. And if he can do all those things, I expect to see a mirrored result from what he did in Colorado and what he did in New Jersey. And that was at a base level, improve in year two. And I do think that it's going to be a little bit more significant because, as you mentioned, you can't get much worse than he was last year. And I still think there's a reason that he was given that contract. Is he going to play up to it? No. But he was given that contract because he showed the potential to play at the level of that contract. Again, it's a long road for him to actually get to being of that market value, but I do think he gets much closer to it this season because of those reasons, that lesser responsibility, and really, mainly, that hopefully added confidence that the Penguins have instilled in him all season long, all off season long, from Kyle Dubas saying that they expect him to come in and be the guy that they signed on July 1st in 2023.
Yeah, you take the contract out of it, you're looking at it as a player akin to Cody Ceci in the Penguins organization. In the top six and other teams, he didn't play great. He has a career minus. Then he gets to Pittsburgh, and Mike Sullivan puts him in the third pairing role with Jack Johnson, of all people. And they do wonderful for their position. They do good for that third pairing. They're not out there to score. They're not really out there to shut down too much either. But they are shutting down. They are exceeding expectations in certain areas, and it's because they're given a lesser role. And that's just exactly the situation that Ryan Graves is going to have to head into this year. Mm-hmm. Go in with a lesser role. If he starts exceeding those lesser roles' expectations, well, then he starts moving back up a little. It's going to be an inch at a time, if he can even get there, considering now that it's once again a not pretty stacked left side. But he'll be fighting through spots with Matt Grzelcyk on the left side. Ryan Shea will still be around for at least another season. There's that situation. Sebastian Aho, not that one, is going to be here for 2 seasons, possibly. So
yeah,
who knows what position he takes exactly, but there's going to be a little bit of a battle within the NHL lineup to see who goes up and out. And obviously Marcus Pettersson to start the year, probably number 1.
Yeah.
So we'll see how far Ryan Graves can take himself. If he spends all season on the third pairing, I mean, again, money-wise, not ideal. But
fit-wise, it might be.
If it fits and the Penguins are under the cap and still kind of able to maneuver and maybe extend Marcus Pettersson, depending on how that situation goes, and win games, then I don't think people are going to be too worried about money at this juncture. Plus, who knows where the Penguins are going to be 2-3 years down the line.
Yeah.
His contract, Ryan Graves' contract runs until 2029. So buckle up.
Yeah, like I said at the beginning of this, there is no end in sight for Ryan Graves in Pittsburgh. You just have to hope that it improves, and I do think it will improve, but the one thing that does scare me, like you mentioned, is I think it'll improve if he gets a large portion, at least the first quarter, potentially half of the season, where he gets to play. Maybe that's a bit exaggerated, but he doesn't get shifted up immediately after finding any success. I think you need to let him stew in success a little bit if he finds it on the third pairing, so he can build his confidence, because you look at that second pairing, it is a different animal. Once you get up there to play with a Letang or a Karlsson, it's much different because you're taking away what he does best, which is move the puck himself, because there's no way when you're on a pairing with Karlsson or Letang that you're going to be the one that moves the puck up, at least on the majority of the breakouts. So I think that's the one thing that scares me, is above him is Matt Grzelcyk, and there is a large opportunity for that to fail. And if it does, then what are you left with? Kind of a patchwork, which is where they were at last season, because Ryan Graves didn't pan out. And you looked at that and said, well, it was kind of supposed to be Pettersson, Graves, and then we'll figure out the third pairing. And now it's, well, I guess P.O. Joseph can come off the bench and go right into a top pairing role. So the Grizzly thing does have me slightly concerned. Obviously, I think that he is shown at his best to be able to handle that role. But again, he hasn't been at his best for the last couple of seasons. If it can all pan out, the Penguins could have a half-decent defense, and I understand that's not what people want to hear, but that's the reality of the situation. If it doesn't pan out, you could be in a similar situation to last year where Grizzly didn't work. Ryan Graves is forced into a bigger role that he may or may not be ready for at the moment because, whatever reason, and you're stuck in the same situation, which the Pens are a rebuilding team. At the end of the day, all that tells me is, well, they could at the very least get a higher lottery pick, I guess. But I do think that at the end of the day, I do think it's going to be better than it was last year. Defense as a whole, and specifically Ryan Graves.
Yeah, if things aren't working out with Ryan Graves or Matt Grizzly, I mean, sure, it's tough to all of a sudden make moves. The Penguins will, at the very least, have options for that left side. Once again, there's no P.O. Joseph, but there's John Ludwig. There's Philip Kroll still. It's flipping up and down the lineup. I already kind of mentioned Sebastian Aho for what it's worth. Like there will still be names that they can turn to if everything does hit the fan and just gets worse. Like I said, it's hard to make those maneuvers because when you're discussing that many options, you're discussing healthy scratches, maybe even trying to fly people through waivers. Like it's going to get messy.
Yeah.
But again, if they're still trying to win this year, win in the muck, play in the mess that you may have to, you made your bed, lay in it.
Yeah.
If they have to do that, but they're still finding ways to be successful. If the forward core is gangbusters, we're not even worried about what's going on with them. And we can, and this coaching staff can kind of just focus on what to do with a Ryan Graves and Matt Grizzly situation. That's a good problem to have, really.
Yeah.
Like I said, they have the options to patch and play. You don't want to, but if they need to, they have the names, they have the faces. Ryan Shea, John Ludwig, Jack St. Ivan always on the right side. But those are three names that at one point or another last season, both of us have gone, positive name to be in the NHL lineup.
Yeah. Yeah, especially late in the season. You saw Ryan Shea, Jack St. Ivan as a pairing, and they were dominant at points. Again, dominant for a third pairing, but dominant nonetheless in their roles and how they were sent out there. And certainly would help if you got first half Tristan Jarry and first half Alex Nedeljkovic from last year, who were both standing on their head despite there not being a defense really at all in front of them. But let's close things out with a nice summer edition of This Week in Penguins History. Of course, not much happens by way of games or actual on-ice stuff in August, but there was an interesting event that happened this week in Penguins history. August 18th of 2010, the first ever event held at Consol Energy Center. Now, of course, PPG Paints Arena. Horwat, I was trying to keep this from you, seeing if you remembered it. I should have known because you are the Beatles fan in my life, at least the one that, you and my wife are the two neck and neck as the biggest Beatles fans in my life. What was the first event at Consol Energy Center?
Paul McCartney in I forget exactly what tour it was, 2011. But Paul McCartney show, one of his last couple of tours. He's only done a couple since, and opened PPG Paints Arena. I think he got 2 dates out of it, and I believe there was supposed to be a different show that was supposed to open the venue, but it ended up being him anyway. And I believe there is a plaque somewhere in the arena about the first event there being a Paul McCartney show.
Yeah, as far as openers go, I think you could do a lot worse than Sir Paul McCartney, right? You could do a lot worse than a Beatle opening up your arena. But under a month later, September 22nd, the Penguins played their first preseason game on that ice in a 5-1 win over the Detroit Red Wings. So shortly after that, of course, Penguins history in that building began. I got 2 questions to close out the show, and I want everybody listening, give us your answers in the comment section below. First, let's go to the concert side of things. Who is the best act you've seen play at Consol/PPG Paints Arena?
Ironically, I'm going to roll with Paul McCartney again. Not that specific show, but the last time he was there in 20, I have the poster right above me, 14, for the Out There tour. I was still in high school with my mom, and we sat sort of behind the stage, but you're seeing a living legend in a Beatle. You're seeing Paul McCartney. and he's aged obviously, and even then he was pretty old. But just the show that he can put on with the pyro, with the stage setup, the stage design, no matter what seat you're in, you're going to hear great music, and it's a phenomenal show. If he ever does one last, I know he's in his 80s now. If he's ever able to get out on the road for at least come anywhere near the vicinity of where I live, I'm going to try and see him one more time. I would say him. If I had to pick a second, just to like be quick about it, that's tough because sometimes shows aren't phenomenal there. But seeing the Blink-182 reunion show there last year was kind of fun too.
Yeah, those are two solid choices there. For me, same thing. Best one, living legend, Phil Collins at PPG Paints Arena. Seeing him play in the air tonight with his son on the drums as well, no less, was an experience. I mean, obviously, the rest of the concert was great. Sussudio is underrated in all aspects of the term, but seeing In the Air tonight by Phil Collins, I understand he was at that point similar to Paul McCartney, a little bit past his prime, a little bit older, but still so much fun being in the building and hearing that live. Garth Brooks was really good. That was the first concert that I saw there. I've seen Garth Brooks, I believe, 3 or 4 times because, I mean, I grew up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, big country area, and my mom loved Garth Brooks, so
Garth.
I love Garth. And then also shout out to Harry Styles. His concerts are always very good. That was the first time I saw him. No, second time I saw him was at PPG Paints Arena. He just puts on a really good show. He does. I mean, I was at MSG a couple of weeks ago, and there's obviously the banner up there, 15 straight nights at MSG. The dude is an entertainer. So certainly another fun concert there. So a lot of good acts there, and I'll be coming back in November, I believe, for another one. So
yeah, me and Megan are going to see Casey Musgraves in November.
Yeah, that's the one I'm going to.
There you go. We'll have to figure out what section we're in again. And also Justin Bieber, again, not child Justin Bieber, adult, still a great show.
Hey, listen, ain't no shame. Everybody loves baby Justin Bieber. On the stage, off the stage is, its own thing. But let's close it out with some hockey talk here. Second question, what is the best Penguins moment at PPG Paints Arena / Consol Energy Center?
That's a T-ball.
It's a tough one.
That's lobbing that one into me. Let me double overtime, Game 7 Eastern Conference Final. It sucks that they haven't won a cup on home ice ever, but it's got to be that one. The Chris Kunitz goal, just because of it was at that arena, that crowd. Me being there as a fan was awesome, and just that whole situation. The game could have ended 40 times before then. Really, watching every time I go back and watch the replays of that game, it really does feel like there were multiple moments in the first overtime that it could have ended for both teams, but letting it happen at that moment to seal a second straight trip to the Stanley Cup final. If I'm not mistaken, that was Kunitz left after that season, right?
That was Kunitz's last goal as a member of the Penguins.
Of course it was. I thought he scored in the final. But of course it was. It was one of those moments, and for me in my head at the time, it really felt like, yeah, they're winning again. There's no doubt about it now. I don't care who they're playing next. They have this mojo going in now, and who's going to stop them? Because Ottawa, it's Ottawa. We look at Ottawa now as a pretty basement-dwelling team. They were solid that year. I mean, I think things just sort of came together because they weren't phenomenal the years before, but there was something about that Senators team that year that everyone was just peaking at the right moment. And Chris Kunitz, of all people, put a nail in the coffin of that franchise that they're still trying to remove. Yeah.
Ryan Dzingel was a terror in that series. And then,
yes, he was.
And then he wasn't for the rest of his career. But no, it's interesting because you look at that building and they really didn't have a marquee moment until those 16-17 cup runs. And there are so many in those cup runs. I mean, you could say the Crosby return goal.
That's what I was going to mention. Yeah.
That was probably the one. But again, a regular season return game was in November, no less, was the marquee moment of a building, of a team that has been heralded as one of the best of the 21st century to this point. It's crazy because that was, for the longest time, the marquee moment. And then you go to 2016, 2017. The other one I had here as a close second is the Nick Bonino goal against the Capitals. You could go to Game 7 against the Lightning in 2016. That second goal that Brian Rust scored against the Tampa Bay Lightning. You could go to, obviously, the San Jose Sharks, the overtime goal that Connor Sherry scored, where Crosby, Nostra Crosbyus says, hey, you're going to go right there and you're going to score the Game 2 winner. And that's what it's going to be. So many great moments now, especially, including last season. You go back and you look at the Yager celebration. You look at all the moments that have happened since then, 2016 and 2017. Before then, it was a nice building. It had its moments, but since then, the amount of moments and the type of moments that we have seen has just taken off. And I think that a lot of Penguins fans are, one, grateful for that, and two, spoiled to have been able to see so many phenomenal moments in the past 8 years at that arena.
I'm trying to rack my brain as to like what could have stood out before Chris Kuntz's goal. And you mentioned those playoff overtime goals, but again, they don't really stand out as building defining moments like the way Lemieux's goal in 91 did, or even Yager's in 92, or even Lemieux's return or final goal. It's the way those defined Civic / Mellon Arena. I can't think of anything before the Kunitz goal to the point where I'm thinking of Brent Johnson punching out Rick DiPietro may have been up there. Like,
that was probably top 5.
Or Sid getting hit in the face with the puck and losing multiple teeth on Jerome McGinley's, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly,
it was
Penguins debut.
Brooks Orpik. Yeah, but it was McGinley's debut.
Yeah.
Brooks Orpik's the one that shot the puck. And I was like, why are we taking Brooks Orpik slap shots from the point?
Yeah, well, because Game 6 on Long Island, that's why.
Well, I mean,
that year, I believe.
It was that. I believe it was later that year. Because, I mean, even you look at that 2013 Eastern Conference final run, there's not a lot of moments from it. There's not. I mean, that McGinley year, there was not a lot of moments in the playoffs because, if I'm not mistaken, did they not dominate the first 2 series and there was not really close games?
Well, like I said, the Islanders Game 6 was on Long Island.
Yeah.
I don't even remember which round that was, if that was 1 or 2.
That was Series 1 because Series 2 was against the Senators.
Don't even remember they played the Senators, so there's that. Nothing happened there.
And then they did not create any moments against the Bruins.
Yeah. I mean, because they didn't make deep playoff runs until 16-17. So, obviously 13. But I can't come up with any other moments. I just can't. It starts and ends with Chris Kunitz. Obviously, there were the small little ones, like you mentioned, the Crosby return. I believe the moment that we discussed the Crosby last week, the skating behind the net with Jason Spezza, I'm pretty sure that was at Consol Energy Center. If I'm remembering correctly.
It was. Yeah, I don't have my notes from last Tuesday's episode, but I believe it was as well.
That could have been up there. So, there's little bits, but again, none stand out much at all, like the way Chris Kuntz's goal does.
Mm-hmm.
Crosby's return goals obviously up there. That might be number 2. And then Ron Hainsey scoring in Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final that year. I mean, or Game 5, sorry.
I don't know if the Hainsey thing was as big outside of us and college. I mean, I'm sure that there was a lot of people that really appreciated Ron Hainsey's, Paul Coffey moment, but I think we might have taken it a little bit further than most did.
And since then, there's nothing much to remember. There's a couple things, I'm sure, but
yeah.
Well, hey, yep, we've hit the end of this one.
Yeah, that's where the Penguins are. But again, Penguins fans, I'm going to say still fall under the spoiled category for what the Penguins gave them in 2016, 2017, and some of the moments since then. Obviously, the playoff success hasn't been there, but you talk to anybody who was there that weekend on February 18th this past season, it was something special. And awesome. I understand that they came out of it with a loss, and that was just what the Penguins were and what the Penguins might be next season. But everything leading up to the game was very, very special and very, very memorable. Not going to compare to a Stanley Cup, but it's certainly something that is going to go down in the history books as one of the best days of that arena's history. Yep. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Tip of the Iceberg. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. We'll try to be a little bit more consistent going forward as schedules start to clear up a little bit before it obviously all comes crashing down at the beginning of the season and we're all drowning in news from everywhere. But honestly, I long for those days. I long for those days because these days of nothing happening, it makes you really miss the NHL and professional hockey. But we will be back later this week with a new episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.